Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. A better deal or bust it seems to be the message from the Greek Prime Minister. There was wavering when the day began, but he spoke in the evening and said that there would be a referendum come Sunday, and he's urging the Greeks to vote no so he can get a better deal. Will that be on offer, though, come Monday morning? We're talking about it with our panel, Xavier Timbaud, director of the French Economic Observatory at Sciences Po OFCE. Also with us, Bruno Bernard of France's centre-right party, the Les Républicains. I'm sorry, it's a new name. I'm not used to saying it.
I know.
Les Républicains.
It's a hard one.
The Republicans.
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay. From London, Roger Boodle, managing director at Capital Economics. And we're pleased to welcome for part two of our discussion, Nikos Tsibidas, who is with state broadcaster ERT. Nikos, I should say, state broadcaster back on air, since you had been taken off air a couple of years back, and it was the government of Alexis Tsipras that restored the station.
Yes, public radio television in Greece is back on the air. I'm glad to be with you this evening.
All right, well, Greece at the heart of the debate in the German parliament earlier this Wednesday. There we heard some good cop.
I've repeated over and over again that the door to talks with the Greek government has always been and remains open. We owe that to the people, and we owe that to Europe.
All right, that was good cop, but there was also bad cop.
The situation has dramatically worsened. Since this government took power, it has done nothing except reverse measures, go back on previous commitments. It has negotiated and negotiated. We don't know if the Greek government is going to hold a referendum or not, whether it is for or against it. You can't, in all honesty, expect us to talk with them in a situation like this. We need to wait and see what happens in Greece.
Bruno Bernard, there's a split, by the way, between Paris and Berlin on this, because the French are saying we should be negotiating. The Germans are saying no way, not till the referendum's over. You heard Wolfgang Schäuble, the finance minister. Rules are rules. Do you agree with that?
I agree that France has been quite silent about what's going on in Greece, and François Hollande has is yet to make an impression on the debate, the current debate. And worryingly, Greece is not being debated in French Parliament at the moment, like we've seen in the Bundestag. I like the act between Merkel and Schäuble, but again...
Is it an act, or are there differences between the two?
Well, I hope it's an act. I hope it's a strategy for the German government. But at the same time, it always gives this impression that the only country that matters in Europe is Germany, and the only country that, makes serious decisions is Germany. And it's not going to play well with the Greeks, that's for sure, and it's not going to play well with the other countries. And now it's about, it's for the EU and Germany and France as well to decide whether they want to keep Greece within the EU or kick it out, which will be a major decision. And that's what I think Tsipras is counting on.
Xavier Timbaud, I've heard one German economist who disagrees with the government, Wolfgang Münchau, describe it like a turkey rooting for Christmas, what's going on in Germany right now.
Yeah, well, I agree with the fact that Germany is starting to appear as a kind of, not a leader, but a kind of selfish country, stating that what is in its own interest and what is not. And I think that Merkel and Schäuble are playing a dangerous game, which is not choosing to exclude Greece from the euro or not, because I don't think they want to be in any way responsible of that. But their game is to exclude Tsipras from being prime minister. And that may explain their tactic and their act in that. I think that François Hollande has some difficulties in coming into that debate and say, no, we have to talk to the currently elected prime minister, whoever he is. And if there is another one, then we will talk as well with the new one.
He said it, but it's just not getting picked up.
Yeah, well, but I think it's important. I mean, well, what happened tonight, and the fact that Merkel said, "I don't want to talk now. I want to wait for the referendum," is an important thing, because she's saying, well, there is a possibility that the guy we are talking right now in Athens is not going to be the same one on Sunday night. And so I want to wait to know to whom am I talking before talk to anybody. And so Merkel is saying, I'm not talking to the Greeks, I'm not talking about Europe, I'm talking with Tsipras, and I don't like it. And Schäuble is saying exactly the same thing. And I think that it is a bit wrong, because what we need is to talk about Europe. What we need is to talk together about Europe, and not to make it a person-to-person question. And that is very wrong. And unfortunately, François Hollande has not been able to take part into that and stop that dangerous game.
Roger Boodle, in part one of our discussion, we amply went over the criticism of the Greek prime minister, saying he'd overplayed his hand in the negotiations. But what about the Germans? Are they misplaying their hand?
Well, I think they misplayed their hand some considerable time ago, in that the fault with the euro doesn't entirely lie with the Greeks or the other southern European countries. I think Germany has mismanaged this situation. It's operated policy too tightly. It's exercised a baleful influence over the ECB. The ECB didn't help the growth of demand in Europe soon enough or powerfully enough. This is traditional German economics and traditional German politics. But we have to start from where we are, I guess. We can't undo those errors. And given where we are, I understand the German position. I mean, we're playing for very high stakes here. And to echo what your other panel members were saying, I can readily see how the German government would think, look, actually, if we wait, there's a real chance that we're going to get a government that's much more palatable to us after Sunday's referendum. That makes sense. But of course, what happens if they don't? And I think there's a pretty good chance that they won't. Then they're back where they are now. And I don't see them being able to make significant concessions to Greece. I don't think it's going to be possible, and to make sense of the euro and to hold it together. So I think there's a renewed logjam if Tsipras is re-elected. And that's why I say I think this ends up with Greece leaving the euro. Now, of course, it's true that Mr. Tsipras won't be wanting to be the person blamed for leaving the euro, and similarly, Greece and presumably France won't want to be blamed for pushing Greece out of the euro. Someone's going to have to do it, as it were, against the wishes of these two sides. And I suspect it will be decided in the banking sector. What will happen is that if there's no resolution, there'll just be a massive outflow of deposits and a real crisis in the Greek financial system. And in the end, the ECB won't provide enough assistance. It might even cut back its scale of assistance, and that will prompt a Greek exit.
All right, and I guess backing you up on what you said about the past is one viewer saying piece of hate his name. The Greek banks had to be refinanced for Greece to become part of the EU, so it's no good Germany moaning at them defaulting now. Let me turn now to Nikos Tsibidas. By the way, Nikos, we're getting word out of Washington. It's not just one bad cop in this negotiation. The International Monetary Fund saying payment extensions do not help nations in crises. Of course, they haven't yet ruled on whether or not they're going to consider it a default, that missed payment from midnight last night. They're giving themselves a bit of time, but nonetheless, it doesn't sound good from that last statement. How isolated do Greeks feel today on July the 1st?
Well, in terms of international organizations, in terms of Eurogroup and other institutions, yes, Greece may feel a bit isolated, or very much isolated. But the sentiment here, watching the big rallies in big European capitals and elsewhere, is that many people in other European countries are supporting what Greece is doing right now, and there there is a sentiment of solidarity from the other European peoples at this moment. But I think there are many bad cops, as you put it before, and fewer good cops, and even good cops are not so good. In our case, I think everybody have drawn the swords at this moment and the jousting, but no actual wounds, not in Greece at this moment and not in the other institutions. And it may sound weird of me saying that, I'm considering that the banks are closed and the people are queuing up, etc. But it's remarkable the calm and the coherent way that the Greeks are acting at the moment outside the banks, and there is no signs of panic, etc. So this is what makes the board of the convening of the ECB board, which I think is convening right now. This is what makes this session very, very important. If ELA remains for the Greek banks, then calm will remain in this country, and everybody should then hold their breath until Monday to decide what's going on, to wait for the Greek people to decide on the ballot boxes on Sunday whether they want the deal that Mr. Juncker put through and the other institutions, or they will give Mr. Tsipras the ability and the possibility to go and renegotiate on new terms.
Let me pick up on that point with Roger Boodle. I know that markets don't just react on one single story. Nonetheless, we saw Europe's indexes close up this Wednesday. Is it because they're just saying, well, we'll see what happens come Monday after the referendum's over?
Oh, I think it's partly that. It's also partly, as you said earlier on, there were stories circulating earlier on today to the effect that some sort of deal might be done and that the referendum might not take place. The markets have fallen earlier on. They have a natural tendency to correct the previous movement. But frankly, like everybody else, they're confused. They aren't of one mind. It's a very uncertain situation. So just as politicians in Paris and Berlin are saying to themselves, well, let's wait and see what happens come Sunday, then these people in the markets, by and large, are saying exactly the same thing.
All right. Of course, the Greek crisis is also spurring the famous adage that a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. On Monday, best-selling French economist Thomas Piketty reminded listeners on Breakfast Radio here in France that Europe's debts were much bigger after World War II, and now is the time to not just think in terms of Greece, but the entire EU.
It's time for change. But for that, you need European leaders like Hollande and Merkel to take responsibility and say that restructuring the debt needs to be done now, not tomorrow.
So Europe needs political leadership, is what he's saying. And he and a whole host of other economists signing a letter calling on the EU to improve the terms by which there is a European monetary union, to have more of a fiscal union, this sort of thing. He's saying now is the time to strike while we're in the midst of this crisis. Bruno Bernard, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a great timing. Unfortunately, it's been the white whale of European politics for the past, 50 years, unfortunately. So, yeah, maybe this crisis is an opportunity for some sort of economic government, EU economic government, to rise from the ashes of this crisis. But unfortunately, we've seen that leaders, especially German leaders, for example, but French as well, are not up to the task. And, I know that the UK, for example, is not in the eurozone, but we definitely would like to have and to hear Mr. Cameron's view on what's going on in Greece and what's going on in the eurozone. I mean, these are the three main countries: Britain, France, and Germany, leading the EU. And where are their leaders now? They're nowhere.
Do you agree?
Well, I agree that the good way to exit all that would be to improve the governance and the legitimacy of the euro. I mean, I think that a very important thing is that a lot has been said about the illegitimacy of the euro and the policies that it was implying, and a lot is true about that. But one thing that the Greeks are showing is that exiting the euro is not so easy. And it's not something that people want. And so in that sense, the Greeks are showing that somehow euro is legitimate to the people. It's important to the people and they don't want to leave it. And so I think that we have to make something of that. That is to say, we do not want to dismantle the euro. And some people are saying this is a solution. But I don't think that this is what the people are expressing today. And they're not expressing that in Greece. And clearly this is not an easy option for them and they don't want to do it. And so we have to take into account that and think about how something which is so important for the people may, in the end, bring unlegitimate policies and an unlegitimate situation than the one we are in. We have built the euro. The possibility of a default of a state was not taken into account. Well, it's happening. And before building an economic government, we have to deal with that. How do we deal with the default of a state and staying inside the euro? That's a very important question. Greece
And it's doable?
Well, it's doable. Yes, it's doable. It has to be doable. Because if it is not, then it means that the euro is something very weak, full of contradictions. I mean, California can default and stay into the States, stay into the dollar, and things can go on. It is painful for Californian people, but it is possible. So we have to look exactly at the way it is done, and we have to try to find our own way in the euro to do something like that.
All right, let me ask Nikos Tsabidas, first of all. Do you want to stay in the euro?
The recent polls have shown that the majority of the Greek people want to stay in the euro. Of course, they want to stay in the European Union, and I don't think there is a question about that at the moment in Greece. I mean, the referendum, it's not a question about the euro or drachma. It's not a question if Greece will remain in the eurozone or even in the European Union or not. It's a question whether this government or these people, the Greek people, will accept the offer in table by the institutions, by the Troika, or they will give the ability to the Greek government to go and renegotiate. I just want to give you, because coming at this moment, three breaking news from Greece are coming at the moment. All the economic staff, head ministers, junior ministers are meeting with the Prime Minister for the issue of capital controls and how this is going. Mr. Varoufakis, I think the Minister of Economics here in Greece, just made a statement that he says that the only obstacle between us and the Troika right now is the debt issue, and there is no way, there is no possibility of a bail-in in the Greek banks. And the last one, the head of the parliament, Mrs. Konstantopoulou, a very prominent Syriza member, is actually giving an interview at 9 o'clock. Will be broadcasted nationwide, and from what we're learning, she will speak in line with Mr. Tsipras' earlier statement, but she's going to use more vivid and more colorful tones.
All right, so she's going to be speaking out then. Let me ask Roger Boudel about this. Your reaction. We've just been describing the mess that's in Greece, the mess that's partly from joining the single currency, and yet you just heard Nikos Tsabidas say a majority of citizens still want to stay in the euro. How do people in Britain feel about this? Britain, which is talking not about exiting the euro because you're not part of it, but the EU entirely.
Well, of course, most British people, I guess, like people everywhere, are completely bemused and befuddled by all this. And of course, they're not experts on currency regimes, so they just see the mess and they're obviously
is it because the Greeks are? Is it because the Greeks are deluded that they want to stay in the euro, or is there something in it for them?
Oh, no, I've got a very serious point to make about this. And for a start, there's a big difference between the euro and the EU. I mean, it's perfectly possible, I think, for Greece to leave the euro and stay in the EU. You know, people virtually never do vote or support changes of currency regime. If a vote had been taken in 1931 about whether Britain should stay on the gold standard or leave, I guarantee you there would have been a very large majority for staying on the gold standard, which would have been precisely the wrong thing to have done. Similarly, in 1992, when Britain was in the European Exchange exchange rate mechanism. All of the newspapers, the so-called experts, the government, the opposition, everyone, programs like this, was saying, well, we've got to stay in the European exchange rate mechanism, there's no alternative. So similarly, if you'd conducted a poll, British people would have said we must stay in the ERM. But of course, that was completely the wrong thing to have done. So I'm not remotely surprised by this. On the whole, populations don't vote for changes of currency regime. Have to be foisted upon them.
All right, and again, what impact will there be in Britain on what happens in Greece in terms of the conversation you're having there about a Brexit?
Well, that's, I think, a very good point. I don't think the impact is huge, but I suspect the direction of travel is to increase Euroscepticism in Britain. The point is that the euro is, I think, the biggest project that the EU has undertaken. And a lot of people in Britain look at it and think it's been pretty much a failure. We, of course, didn't join it. That looks like being the right decision from Britain's point of view. The way the Greek situation is developing, I mean, whether you think the euro is a good thing or not for the rest of Europe, it's looking, isn't it, as though it's a pretty disastrous situation for Greece, and both sides have handled this very badly. It doesn't say a great deal about, I would argue, the German government, the European institutions, perhaps the French government. So it doesn't say a great deal in favour of the way the Greek government has managed things. It looks like a train crash. So I think the reaction in Britain would be to say, look, this is the biggest thing that the EU has ever done. It's turning out to be a complete disaster. What does that say about the nature of the European project, and should we be involved in this at all? I think it will strengthen the possibility of an outvote in Britain.
Oh dear. So one crisis may help to fuel another, according to Roger Boodle. Many thanks for joining us from London. I want to thank as well for being with us here Xavier Timbaud and Bruno Bernard, as well as Nikos Tsibiras in Athens. Stay with us, though. Our Media Watch segment is next. And we say hello to James Creedon. July 1st, first day after that missed payment in Greece.
That's right, and some creative people online are finding solutions that are rather imaginative, rather poetic, but I'm not sure
by the way,
they're that realistic.
When we were speaking yesterday at the same time, you talked about that crowd...
Exactly, and in fact it has now raised, Francois, about €1 million. This is a crowdfunding effort. Yes. Well, it's getting there. It's climbing. It's climbing. Usually these things have a 1 month or 2 month deadline.
Is far from...
That's right. It is chicken feed compared to what needs to be 1.6 billion.
Something like €3 per EU citizen.
That's right. So if everybody threw in their tuppence worth, so to speak, this could potentially, and in theory at least, work. And indeed, if you look at Wired.com, they're talking about how the amount of people going onto the crowdfunding website, which you can see here on Indiegogo, has caused the site to crash on a number of different occasions. So there's a lot of interest being generated by the project. And even the guy behind it, a British guy in his 20s, Tom Feeney, has written a piece in The Guardian today about it. The idea is you offer rewards for the money that is being raised. But a lot of people are looking at the small problems related to this very big idea, namely that this money wouldn't go to the Greek people at all. That was the whole idea of the crowdfunding exercise, that it'll sort out the debt. But as this article points out, 1.6 million isn't, in fact, the total sum owed. It's 275 billion going up to 2057, and none of that money, whether it be 1.6 billion or 257 billion, would go to the Greek people at all. So a lot of people are suggesting alternatives. In any case, just before we get on to the alternatives, apparently the Germans are donating the most to this Londoners crowdfunded Greek bailout. What we can conclude from that, I don't know. Maybe an element of, I don't know. In any case,
is that shaming you, Bruno? Now, will you be donating to this crowdfunding?
Oh well, you know, if it's only €3, then that's fine.
Right. Well, if everybody did it, apparently this would work. In any case, the Press Project, which is, as the name suggests, a media project that was set up in 2010, Francois, they are now pointing out that they are a much more, what would you say, worthy source of crowdfunded money, that any of the money given to this previous project that has got such international media attention in the last day or two, none of that will actually go to the Greek people. This is a project that was set up after the state broadcaster in Greece was cut of public funding was taken off the airwaves in 2010, and this is a completely independent media project. It was set up as a Twitter account in 2010, and it's depending entirely on donations from the Greek people. And at the moment, its budget is about 200,000 euros a year. So they are saying, why not donate something that will make a real difference to the Greeks right now? And so it seems to be a case of the idea catching on, Francois. So whether it's a gimmick or not, a lot of people definitely sharing the concept.
All right, many thanks for that, James Green. Keep us posted on the numbers. All right, I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.